What happens when a government scandal stops being about process and starts becoming a test of truth itself? In this explosive confrontation inside Parliament, Kemi Badenoch accuses Prime Minister Keir Starmer of something no leader can afford to be accused of lightly, misleading the House on a matter tied to security, judgment, and one of Britain's most sensitive diplomatic appointments. But this is not just a clash over procedure, because once questions emerge about vetting, hidden warnings, and who knew what and when, the story changes. It becomes a battle over whether this was an honest mistake, a dangerous gamble, or the moment public trust began to crack in full view.
And I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. His reputation is at stake. Everyone is watching. It is finally time for the truth. Earlier today, Mr. Speaker, Downing Street admitted that the Prime Minister inadvertently misled the House. The Prime Minister has chosen not to repeat that from the dispatch box. I will remind him that under the Ministerial Code, he has a duty to correct the record at the earliest opportunity. The Prime Minister says he only found out on Tuesday that Peter Mandelson failed the security vetting. The earliest opportunity to correct the record was Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, almost a week ago. This is a breach of the Ministerial Code. Under that code, he is bound to be as open as possible with Parliament and the public in answering questions today. So let me start with what we do know. We know the Prime Minister personally appointed Peter Mandelson to be our ambassador to the United States. We know that Mandelson had a close relationship with a convicted paedophile. We know that he had concerning links with Russia and China, links that had already raised red flags. We know that the Prime Minister announced the appointment before vetting was complete, an extraordinary and unprecedented step for the role of US ambassador. The Prime Minister says that it was usual for this because it was a political appointment. So I will remind him and the rest of the Labour front bench who are heckling that Peter Mandelson was a politician who had been sacked twice from government for lying. That meant he should have gone through the full security process. And we also know, finally, Mr. Speaker, that when Peter Mandelson failed the security vetting, he was allowed to continue in the role with access to top-secret intelligence and security information. This goes beyond propriety and ethics. This is a matter of national security. So let me turn to what we do not know. We still do not know exactly why Peter Mandelson failed that vetting. We do not know what risks our country was exposed to, and we do not know how it is possible that the Prime Minister said repeatedly that this was a failure of vetting, went on television and said things that were blatantly incorrect, and not a single advisor or a single official told him that what he was saying wasn't true. At every turn, with every explanation, the government story has become murkier and more contradictory. It is time for the truth. There are too many questions to ask in the allotted time, Mr. Speaker, so I'm now going to ask the Prime Minister just 6 questions, and I have taken the unprecedented step of providing these questions to the Prime Minister in advance. So he has them in front of him. And I have asked for these questions to be put online for the public. They and I expect him to answer. The Prime Minister appointed a national security risk to our most sensitive diplomatic post. Let's look at how this happened. The Right Honourable Gentleman told me at PMQs in September 2025 that full due process was followed in this appointment. We now know that in November 2024, Lord Case, the then Cabinet Secretary, told him this process required security vetting to be done before the appointment. He did not mention any of what Lord Case said in his statement earlier. So, first question, does the Prime Minister accept that when he said on the floor of the House that full due process was followed, this was not true? Secondly, on the 11th of September last year, journalists asked his Director of Communications if it was true that Mandelson had failed security vetting. These allegations were on the front page of a national newspaper. And yet, Number 10 did not deny the story. Why? 3. Will the Prime Minister repeat from the dispatch box his words last week that no one in Number 10 was aware before Tuesday that Mandelson had failed his vetting? The Prime Minister says he's furious that he wasn't told the recommendations of the vetting. Yet on the 16th of September, a Foreign Office Minister told Parliament, and I quote, "The national security vetting process is rightly independent of ministers who are not informed of any findings other than the final outcome." This was the government's stated process. So why is the Prime Minister so furious that it was followed? On the 4th of February 2026, the Prime Minister, fifth question, Mr. Speaker, on the 4th of February 2026, the Prime Minister told me from the dispatch box that the security vetting he had received had revealed Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. How could he say that if he had not seen the security vetting? And finally, Mr. Speaker, Sistema is a Russian defense company closely linked to the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin's war machine. Was the Prime Minister aware before the appointment that Peter Mandelson had remained a director of that company long after Russia's invasion of Crimea? Mr. Speaker, everyone makes mistakes. It is how you face up to those mistakes that shows the character of a leader. Instead of taking responsibility for the decisions he made, the Prime Minister has thrown his staff and his officials under the bus. This is a man who once said, "I will carry the can for the mistakes of any organisation I lead." Instead, he has sacked his cabinet secretary. He has sacked his director of communications. He has sacked his chief of staff. And he has now sacked the permanent secretary of the Foreign Office. All of these people fired for a decision he made. The Right Honourable Gentleman's defence is that he, a former director of public prosecutions, is so lacking in curiosity that he chose to ask no questions about the vetting process. He asked no questions about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. He asked no questions about the security risk Mandelson posed. Apparently, he didn't even speak to Peter Mandelson before his appointment. It doesn't appear that he asked any questions at all. Why? Because he didn't want to know. He had taken the risk, he had chosen his man, Whitehall had to follow. It is the duty of the Prime Minister to ensure he is telling the truth, or does the Ministerial Code not apply to him? I'm only holding the Prime Minister to the same standard to which he held others. On the 26th of January 2022, the Right Honourable Gentleman said to a previous Prime Minister at this dispatch box, if he misled the House, he must resign. Does he stand by those words, or is there one rule for him and another for everyone else?
By the time this exchange reaches its final question, the story is no longer only about Peter Mandelson, nor even only about one controversial appointment. It becomes a broader examination of how power operates when truth, embarrassment, and institutional failure collide at the highest level of government. Kemi Badenoch does not frame this as a routine disagreement over staffing or political judgment. She frames it as a matter of national security, ministerial responsibility, and the credibility of a Prime Minister whose authority depends not just on winning arguments, but on being believed when the stakes are highest. That is what gives the clip its documentary intensity. It is not simply a speech. It is a public attempt to force a government to answer the question every democracy eventually faces. When something goes wrong at the top, who tells the truth first? The structure of the confrontation is what makes it so powerful. Badenoch begins by narrowing the issue to something seemingly procedural. Downing Street, she says, admitted the Prime Minister inadvertently misled the House. But almost immediately, the procedural becomes moral. Under the Ministerial Code, the duty to correct the record is not optional, not cosmetic, and not something that can wait for a better political moment. From there, the speech builds its pressure point by point, not through emotional chaos, but through methodical escalation, security vetting, questions about judgment, timing, contradictions. public statements that, in her telling, do not line up with the facts now coming into view. This steady buildup gives the moment its documentary rhythm. Viewers are not pulled in by noise alone. They are pulled in by the sense that each unanswered question opens the door to a larger one. And then the story darkens. Badenoch turns the appointment itself into a symbol of broader failure. She stresses that Mandelson was appointed to one of Britain's most sensitive diplomatic posts before vetting was complete. And she argues that when concerns later emerged, he was still allowed access to highly sensitive information. In her telling, this is no longer merely an ethics issue or a communications failure. It is a breach that reaches into the core of state responsibility. That shift matters enormously for narration, because it transforms the scene from parliamentary theater into a question of exposure. What risk was created, who accepted it, and why was the public not told clearly and immediately? Once a scandal crosses from embarrassment into national security language, it acquires a different emotional gravity. It stops being about optics and becomes about trust under pressure. What makes the speech especially effective is Badenoch's control of suspense. She says there are too many questions for the allotted time, then reduces them to 6. A simple device, but a powerful one. It tells the audience that the chaos of the scandal can still be organized, that the mess can be cut into direct lines of accountability. Did the Prime Minister say full due process was followed when that was not true? Why was a newspaper report not denied? How could he refer to details in the vetting if he had not seen it? Was he aware of Russian-linked concerns before the appointment? The more she asks, the more the silence around each point becomes part of the story itself. In documentary terms, that is gold. A scandal deepens not only through what is known, but through how many basic questions remain unresolved in public. But the deepest cut in the speech is not even about Mandelson. It is about leadership character. Badenoch argues that when the crisis arrived, Starmer did not take the blame himself. Instead, she says, officials and staff were dismissed for a decision that originated with him. That accusation widens the story from one bad appointment into something more corrosive. A portrait of leadership that demands loyalty on the way up, but distributes punishment on the way down. Whether viewers agree with her politics or not, they immediately understand the emotional force of that charge. Because it touches something universal in public life. People can forgive a mistake more easily than they can forgive a leader who appears to evade ownership of it. And then comes the final turn, the most dangerous one for any politician. Badenoch does not merely accuse him of inconsistency. She quotes Starmer's own past standard back at him. If a prime minister misled the House, he must resign. This is the moment the speech shifts from attack to entrapment. It is no longer only asking, what happened? It is asking, will you live by the rule you demanded of others? That is the kind of line that lingers long after the clip ends, because it strips politics down to its hardest test. Do principles still apply when they reach your own door? For a documentary-style narration, this is the climax. The point where the viewer understands that the scandal is no longer about documents, timelines, or staff briefings alone. It is about whether one standard governs everyone, or whether power always invents an exception for itself. This is why the video works so strongly for audience retention. It has all the elements that hold attention. A reputation on the line, contradictions being laid out one after another, national security hanging over the discussion, and a final question that transforms procedural failure into existential political danger. But more than that, it taps into something deeper than party conflict. It taps into the public instinct that truth delayed is often truth managed, and that when governments become murkier with each explanation, suspicion begins to fill the space where trust used to live. So in the end, this is not just a parliamentary clash over one ambassadorial appointment. It is a story about what happens when state power collides with public accountability in real time. A leader's credibility is tested not in the absence of mistakes, but in the moment those mistakes become undeniable. And that is why this moment matters. Because once the public begins to suspect that truth inside government depends on timing, wording, and political convenience, every official statement becomes less reassuring and every unanswered question becomes more dangerous. The issue now is no longer only whether a bad decision was made. It is whether the people in charge are still capable of telling the country the full truth about it. And until that answer is clear, this story will not fade. Because what is really on trial here is not one appointment, but the integrity of leadership itself.